friends, my name is Brittany. Welcome back or welcome to Rescues and Reads. Whether this is your first video with me or you are an OG viewer, I am so thankful you are here. Today it is time to do my April Book of the Month Pick or Pass. Yes, I know that this video is going up way later than I typically posted, but as I mentioned in my April TBR video, I was out of state for a week tending to my mom in California who just recently had hip replacement surgery, and I am only just now back getting into routine, filming, editing, and all of that good stuff. And this is now going to be the first opportunity that I have to actually get this video up. And I didn't want to forego posting it this month because I have a lot of thoughts and I definitely wanted to come on here and share them with y'all. Now, if you remember back in my March Book of the Month Pick or Pass, I lamented about how incredibly disappointed I was with their selections. And it was made even worse by the fact that March was my birthday month, and it was also the month in which you could add a free Lolly finalist to your box. And so in order to take advantage of that, as well as my free birthday add-on, I was essentially forced to make a selection from their main picks if I wanted to take advantage of those offers, right? And so I went ahead and got a box, even though I probably otherwise would not have. And when I made my April prediction video, I was incredibly excited because there are some amazing releases coming out in April. There was such a wide variety of April releases for Book of the Month to choose from this time around. And I knew that this was going to be the perfect opportunity for Book of the Month to redeem themselves for March's selections. But instead of doing that, Book of the Month decided to double down. They said, hold my beer. And they decided to go ahead and do a month of releases that is probably one of the most disappointing, worst selection months I have experienced in my 7 years of being a Book of the Month subscriber. I don't think that I have ever been so incredibly shocked and let down by the selections that Book of the Month has featured as I was when I saw April's selections, and that's especially true coming off of March's. So needless to say, spoiler alert, this is probably one of the quickest skips that I ever did in my history of being a Book of the Month subscriber. I would not be surprised, honestly, if Book of the Month received a record number of skips in the month of April. Objectively speaking, I do not think that this was a good release month for Book of the Month. Now that all that ranting and raving is out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about what they featured, starting of course with their main selections for the month of April. So the very first release that they featured was a book called The Sun Was Electric Light by Rachel Morton. Now the thing to know about this is that this is a book that you can only get in the US and Canada through Book of the Month. You are not going to find it anywhere else. It was obviously likely released in another country, and Book of the Month is going to be the only place here that is actively selling the novel. So right off the bat, this is a very obscure choice. This is Book of the Month featuring a book that you can't get anywhere else. So this synopsis says, disillusioned with her life in New York, Ruth returns to a lake town in Guatemala where she had been happy a decade earlier. There in Panajachel, she meets two very different women, the calm and practical Emily and the turbulent and intoxicating Carmen. Deciding to stay and build a life at the lake, Ruth finds work first as a nanny to a wealthy local family, then as an English teacher at a village school. Meanwhile, she becomes increasingly infatuated by her friendship with Carmen, pushing away the stability of her connection with Emily. As Carmen's fragile relationship with the world splinters, the difference between being a visitor and truly belonging becomes clear, and Ruth is forced to act. So you can tell that this is definitely going to be very character driven. Book of the Month does give you the warning that this book is highbrow. We all know how I feel about highbrow, like literary fiction type stories. I don't need to tell you that I passed on this book because I passed on the entire box. I would be really curious to know how many of you went with this selection, because this was certainly, out of all of them, perhaps the most surprising selection I saw that they featured in the month of April. Next, they featured Jennifer Weiner's newest release called The Griffin Sisters' Greatest Hits. Now, this is actually not one that I'm terribly surprised to see there. This was actually one that I did consider featuring in my prediction video, but I opted against it just because this, in my opinion, was one of the weaker releases that were coming out in April, and there were so many contenders that were a lot stronger than this, and I opted to keep it out of my prediction video. But this is an April release. It came out on April 8th, and this was not necessarily surprising, but it was disappointing because, like I said, I felt like it was one of the weaker contenders for April. This says, Cassie and Zoe Grossberg were thrust into the spotlight as the Griffin sisters, a pop duo that defied the odds. Together, they skyrocketed to the top, gracing MTV, SNL, and the cover of Rolling Stone. Cassie, a musical genius who never felt at ease in her own skin, preferred to stay in the shadows. Zoe, full of confidence and craving fame, lived for the stage. But fame has a price, and after one turbulent year, the band abruptly broke up. Now, 2 decades later, the sisters couldn't be further apart. Zoe is a suburban mom, warning her daughter Cherry to avoid the spotlight, while Cassie has disappeared from public life entirely. But when Cherry begins unearthing the truth behind their breathtaking rise and infamous breakup, long-buried secrets surface, forcing all three women to confront their choices, their desires, and their complicated bonds. So that synopsis actually sounds kind of intriguing, and it is definitely something that Book of the Month has featured in the past, right? Book of the Month seems to be very much a fan of showcasing books that surround some kind of popular musical figure that have now disbanded, and there are secrets that have to be revealed and all that stuff. So the synopsis of this is very in line with something that Book of the Month would feature. Again, I'm not at all surprised to see this here, but it's definitely not something that I really would have gravitated towards anyway. Next, we have a debut mystery called Everything is Bittersweet by Samantha Cruson. This was definitely somewhat of an early release, as it is coming out in April, but it's not coming out until April 22nd. This says 13 years ago, Providence Bird threw the family car in reverse and ran over her mother. Even though her mother survived, that single instant of teenage madness made Providence a felon and irrevocably altered her life. When her mother disappears years later under suspicious circumstances, Providence tells herself that returning home is her chance to find closure after a prolonged estrangement from her family. Never mind that this is only half the truth. She's also returning to finally confront her abusive father, Tom Bird. Nothing can stamp out Providence's certainty that he is guilty of whatever terrible thing has happened to her mother. As the search unfolds, Providence is haunted by the wounds of her past, none of which cut as deep as the distance between her and her younger sisters. Harmony and Grace are both uniquely scarred by her attempted matricide, and both have their own idea of what reconciliations might look like, if reconciling is even possible. Harmony urges Providence to make their father pay for his sins. Grace begs her to end the cycle of violence that has haunted their family for generations. As her thirst for vengeance collides with her desire to heal her relationships with her sisters, Providence must decide which she values more, revenge or redemption. So I actually really enjoy the sound of that synopsis. This is certainly one that I would be willing to consider adding to my box in a future month, but it wasn't something that was strong enough to convince me that I needed to add it to my box. I think that this is one that I really want to hear more about from other people before I determine whether or not I'm going to pick it up or add it to my TBR, but I definitely think that this has a really, really interesting concept to it. Okay, next we have a debut romance novel called Passion Project by London Sperry. Now this is probably one of the selections that I felt was the most popular. A lot of people I know decided to go ahead and pick this one up. If your 20s are supposed to be the best years of your life, Bennett Taylor is failing miserably, with a big emphasis on the miserable. Where's the zest she keeps hearing about? She's a temp worker in New York City with no direction, no future, and no social life. And at the painful center of this listlessness is grief over the death of her first love. When Bennett runs into Henry Adams just hours after standing him up for a first date, she makes an alcohol-fueled confession. She's not ready to date. In fact, it's been years since she felt passion for something. Rather than leaving her to ruminate, Henry jumps at the opportunity for adventure. Bennett needs to find a passion for life, and Henry will help her find it. Every Saturday, they'll try something new in New York City, as friends, of course. As their passion project continues, the pair tackle everything from carpentry to tattooing to rappelling off skyscrapers, and Bennett feels her guarded exterior ebbing away. But a secret surface, Bennett has to decide what she wants and if she's truly ready to move on. So while that certainly sounds like it's going to be a sweet time, it also sounds kind of very generic. We already know that these two people are going to fall in love. And the thing that makes me very cautious about this one is that if the whole purpose of Bennett working with Henry is to find her passion and she starts to fall in love with Henry, I'm kind of worried that this is going to end up in a direction of Henry becoming Bennett's passion, where Henry is going to be the one that gives Bennett a reason for living. I don't know, that's just kind of the direction that I feel this taking. I'm sure that there's going to be like some deep hidden discoveries going on here, but this is not one that really intrigues me. It's definitely not one that I was interested in adding to my box. And then the very final book that they had as a main selection was a book called 6 Days in Bombay by Alka Joshi. Now she is actually a repeat author. She wrote The Henna Artist, which I do believe was featured on Book of the Month. So I'm not surprised to see this one here. This is an April release coming out on April 15th. So if you did select this, you got a couple of weeks in advance to read it. This says, when renowned painter Mira Novak arrives at Wadia Hospital in Bombay after a miscarriage, she's expected to make a quick recovery, and her nurse, Sona, is excited to learn more about the vivacious artist who shares her half-Indian identity. Sona, yearning for a larger life, finds herself carried away by Mira's stories of her travels and exploits, and is shocked by accounts of the many lovers the painter has left scattered throughout Europe. When Mira dies quite suddenly and mysteriously, Sona falls under suspicion and her quiet life is upended. The key to proving Sona's innocence may lie in a cryptic note and 4 paintings Mira left in her care, sending the young woman on a mission to visit the painter's former friends and lovers across a tumultuous Europe teetering toward war. On the precipice of discovering her own identity, Sona learns that the painter's charming facade hid a far more complicated and troubled soul. So this is actually classified as historical fiction, and it appears that this takes place in the late 1930s. I am really kind of moving away from my historical fiction era. I'm very, very selective about the historical fiction that I pick up. This was not one that really intrigued me at all. All right, now let's go ahead and move on into the add-ons. There were 7 new add-on selections that you could put in your box for April. One of them I do believe was a mid-month add-on, so it came out at some point in March, and that was Retreat by Kristen Ritter. This was actually a book that I did feature in my March Book of the Month prediction video because Kristen Ritter would have been a repeat author. Her debut book was featured on Book of the Month many, many years ago, so I wasn't really sure if Book of the Month would want to feature her again, but they definitely did. So they put this newest release on there. I'm not going to go into details about this one because I have talked about it in another video, but the quick take for this is a sharp-witted scam artist falls into a mess of mistaken identities in this cunning thriller from Kristen Ritter. So that one I was somewhat correct about for March, as that was a mid-month March add-on. But in terms of April specifically, the only 2 books that I predicted correctly out of all of my predictions and all of the books that were featured as add-ons or main selections was Enchantra by Kaylee Smith, which is the follow-up to Phantasma. I'm obviously not going to say anything about this book just because it is a direct follow-up and I don't want to risk spoilers. And then we also had The Bright Years by Sarah Damoff. This was a debut contemporary fiction, considered an early release just because this comes out later in the month of April. The quick take for this just says, in this heart-wrenching story, a family plagued by secrets struggles to reconcile and risks falling apart for good. This I remember being really intrigued by when I read the synopsis for it in my April prediction video. Again, this is an add-on, so even if I had wanted this one, I wouldn't have been able to get it in April. I am willing to consider this for future months, but this is another one that I want to hear like more reviews on before I actually take that plunge. Now, the next add-on that I have here is actually the newest release from Olive E. Blake called Gifted and Talented. I do believe that Olive E. Blake has been featured on Book of the Month in the past, but for some reason this was just not on my radar to add to my predictions for the month. I am not an Olive E. Blake fan. I attempted the Atlas 6 series. I read the Atlas 6, wasn't really impressed, and then I DNF'd the Atlas Paradox. I am just not really a fan of Olive E. Blake's writing. I find her incredibly pretentious and not in a good way, and so I'm really just not willing to read anything more from her, but I know a lot of people are really big fans. And if you hear a lot of chaos out there, that is because I'm home alone filming and Archie is like doing zoomies all over the house. So he is just running around living his best life. I will read the synopsis of this one because I haven't talked about it before. It says, Fair Wren, the brilliant CEO of Wren Fair Magitech and so-called father of modern technology, is dead. Any one of his 3 telepathically and electrokinetically gifted children could be a plausible inheritor to the Wren Fair throne. Meredith, textbook accomplished eldest daughter and the head of her own groundbreaking biotech company, has recently cured mental illness. If only her father's fortune wasn't her last hope for keeping her journalist ex-boyfriend from exposing what she really is, total fraud. Arthur, second youngest congressman in history, fights the good fight every day of his life, and yet his wife might be leaving him and he's losing his re-election campaign. But his dead father's approval in the form of a seat on the Wren Fair throne might just turn his sinking ship around. Eileen, once the world's most famous ballerina, has spent the last 5 years as a run-of-the-mill marketing executive at her father's company after a life-altering injury put an end to her prodigious career. She might be lacking in accolades compared to her siblings, but if her father left her everything, it would finally validate her worth by confirming she'd been his favorite all along. On the pipeline of gifted kid to clinically depressed adult, nobody wins, but which Wren will come out on top? So it definitely sounds like there's going to be a lot of family drama, a lot of family conflict in there. This is categorized as a fantasy, so I'm not entirely sure what the fantastical elements in this are going to be and how they are going to be utilized. But if you are a fan of Olive E. Blake, if you have a Book of the Month subscription, this is there waiting for you as an add-on. This next add-on is another add-on that I opted not to include in my Book of the Month predictions for April, just because, again, I thought it was one of the weaker contenders. I'm very, very surprised that of all the releases that were coming out in April from authors that have been previously featured on Book of the Month, these were the authors that Book of the Month decided to go with. I don't know, I'm just like absolutely dumbstruck. I cannot even get over it, y'all. It is so profound, my level of shock and disappointment this month. But anyway, the book that I'm talking about is a book called Fun for the Whole Family by Jennifer E. Smith. This says, the 4 Endicott siblings, Gemma, Connor, Roddy, and Jude, were once inseparable, a bond created by the absence of their dazzling, mercurial mother, who would return for a few weeks each summer to whisk them off on sprawling road trips around the country. Decades later, the unthinkable has happened. The Endicotts haven't spoken in years until an out-of-the-blue text arrives from Jude, now a famous actress, summoning them to a small town in North Dakota. They're each at a crossroads. Gemma, who put her own ambitions aside to raise the others, now isn't sure if she wants to be a mother herself. Connor, a celebrated novelist, is floundering after his recent divorce and suffering from an epic case of writer's block. And Roddy, at the tail end of a professional soccer career, is dangerously close to losing his future husband for the chance at one last season. Jude is the only Endicott who seems to have it all together, but appearances can be deceiving. As the weekend unfolds and the siblings wrestle with their shared past and uncertain futures, they'll discover that Jude has been keeping 3 secrets, each of which could change everything. This, again, is a contemporary fiction, a family drama. It sounds like it's going to deal very heavily in sibling dynamics. I'm sure all of these siblings are going to come together, they're going to reunite, and secrets are revealed, and they're probably going to get closer than ever. I don't know. This just sounds like a very generic contemporary fiction that, as you can probably tell, is not doing a whole heck of a lot for me. Next, we have a debut literary fiction called Sky Daddy by Kate Folt. The warning that Book of the Month gives for this literary fiction is not that this is highbrow. It says, things could get weird. This book is experimental. This says, Linda is doing her best to lead a life that would appear normal to the casual observer. Weekdays, she earns $20 an hour moderating comments for a video sharing platform and rides the bus home to the windowless garage she rents on the outskirts of San Francisco. But on the last Friday of each month, she indulges her true passion, taking Bart to SFO for a round-trip flight to a regional hub. The destination is irrelevant because each trip means a new date with a handsome stranger, a stranger whose intelligent windscreens, sleek fuselages, and powerful engines make Linda feel a way no human ever could. Linda knows that she can't tell anyone she's sexually obsessed with planes, nor can she reveal her belief that it's her destiny to marry one of her suitors, uniting with her soulmate plane for eternity. But when an opportunity arises to hasten her dream of eternal partnership, and the carefully balanced elements of her life begin to spin out of control. She must choose between maintaining the trappings of normalcy and launching herself headlong toward the love she's always dreamed of. So this book is about a woman who is sexually obsessed with airplanes. This is actually kind of reminding me about a book that I've heard talked about called Unhinged, where a woman kind of gets it on with her front door. And you know what? To each their own. If that type of weirdness works for you in books, then by all means go ahead, pick this up and enjoy. But I just know me and I know my tastes, and that is not something that I would be able to wrap my head around. That is not something that I would be able to read and say, yes, I understand you, character. I can relate to you, character. I'm going to root for you and your love affair with planes, character. So naturally, this is not one that I will ever be picking up unless, of course, it ends up being featured in a random project that I do on my channel in the future. I'm not sure, but that is definitely outside of my comfort zone there. All right, and then the very final add-on selection that I have here is a book called Water Baby by Chioma Okereke. In Makoko, the floating slum off mainland Lagos, Nigeria, a 19-year-old baby yearns for an existence where she can escape the future her father has planned for her. With opportunity scarce, baby jumps at the chance to join a newly launched drone mapping project aimed at broadening the visibility of her community. Then a video of her at work goes viral, and baby finds herself with options she could never have imagined, including the possibility of leaving her birthplace to represent Makoko on the world stage. But will life beyond the lagoon be everything she's dreamed of, or has everything she wants been in front of her all along? So this definitely sounds like it's going to be a journey of self-discovery. It sounds like we're following a main character who kind of like wants more for her life, and she's going to have the opportunity to get it, but maybe once she has that, it's not all it's cracked up to be. This is one that I know absolutely nothing about. I have seen it absolutely nowhere. Nobody has been talking about it. This was certainly not one that was on my radar. So I would be really intrigued to hear more about this one once people read it. All right, everybody, that is it. Those are all the books that Book of the Month featured in April, either as main selections or as add-on selections. This month especially, I'm incredibly curious to know what your thoughts are. Did you skip like I did? Were you as disappointed in April as I was? Or did you manage to find something that you were really excited about? So I'm really curious to know, did you pick or did you pass? Or if you've made it to the end of this video and you are not feeling chatty, go ahead and leave me an emoji that represents how you felt about Book of the Month selection. Leave me a sad face, a crying face, maybe a smiling face, a joyful face, maybe an angry face. Leave me whatever face best represents your feelings on Book of the Month selections for the month of April, because I honestly cannot even just put my disappointment in words. I don't think I've ever been so incredibly disappointed by a month on Book of the Month. Even in past months when I haven't selected anything, I don't think I've been this surprised and disappointed by what I saw featured. But I know that not everybody else feels that way, so I'm really interested to know what your takes are on April selections. And as always, if you like this video or if you just like me, please be sure to give this a big thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. I typically post 2 videos a week, one on Wednesdays, one on Sundays, and I would love to connect with you in any of those future videos. Or if you'd prefer to connect with me outside of BookTube, you can always find links to my Goodreads, Instagram, and Patreon linked down below, along with any books featured in the video. Until next time, y'all. Bye.